Kia ora koutou. Thank you all very much for coming. Welcome to the project space and welcome to those online. For anyone who hasn't met me before, I'm Rosie Oliver and I'd just like to welcome you on behalf of the CityTown project team and like to introduce Mike Fisher, who's joining us from UrbanTacticians up in Christchurch. Mike will deliver his own introduction, but just a small amount of housekeeping. We will be taking questions as we go from those in the room, and for those who are online, I'll be monitoring the chat on Teams. So please feel free to add your questions into the chat there. And I won't take any more of your time, Mike. We'd love to learn from you about who you are and how you can help us with our journey in Timaru.
Good. And tēnā koutou katoa, ko Mike Fisher toko ingoa. And what an amazing day, Ian. It's amazing sunshine. I was parked up at my little motel and it's got a view over Caroline Bay. And I'm like, well, this is a pretty stunning spot. As I say, one of the best beaches in the country. So I'm going to sort of talk about placemaking. And it might be a concept you've heard about, you're not sure about, and work out, well, what does it mean for us in this place here? What is it, and how can we potentially embrace it? What does it mean for us in our practice from wherever you've come from, whether it's government, non-profit, private sector, you're a homeowner, you're a business, wherever it is, what does it mean? And my experience has been a bit of local government, private sector, non-for-profit. I currently do, as Rosie said, I have a small consultancy practice. I'm working with communities around the country and local governments. And I was going to be in Napier and Hastings earlier this week and going to be in Gisborne next week. And so obviously that's not happening. And I'm going to catch up with my colleagues and friends up there. But and then prior to that, I also work part-time at ChristchurchNZ in Christchurch, which has traditionally been the tourism and marketing agency of the city and events, but they now have an urban development team and looking at how they work differently with some approaches within. They're an arm's length organisation of council, but within and without council with communities and continue the transformation of the city up there. And then just prior to that, Riverside Market. So I helped establish Riverside Market for 3 years up in Christchurch. So I'll bring some of that. I've got some stories to tell about that as well, which I'll hopefully relate and maybe a bit of inspiration. But I do want, there's some questions throughout. I'm happy to take them. We'll have a slot at the end to hopefully have a discussion and hear from you as well. So I'll crack into it. So I'll start. I like to start with the ball. I mean, imagine being in space, I suppose, and looking at this and thinking, right, we're all in this together somewhere. You know, this is a spot where obviously we know at the moment there's a lot happening. There's a lot changing around us, and we're on this sort of globe in space. But as people and as humans, we also think about this level. So we go from that big ball and what's happening around us, the environment, to what's happening in my street. And this was a rubbish bin in Christchurch. I came back from Adelaide, Australia about 6-7 years ago, and I put in a SnapSend solve to the Christchurch City Council, and I took this photo in December last year, so it's still there sort of 6-7 years later like that. And I think we are at that big scale thinking about those dimensions that are shaping us across the globe, but we're also at this sort of level, that human scale, thinking about our place, what's wrong with it. And I think I've been finding that a lot of the rhetoric and the practice around the country in Australia is a lot of adversarial stuff going on, like why are they doing that? And particularly when I worked in government, why aren't you doing something? And when something happens, why did you do that? What is it? And it's a lot of time talking past each other. There's sometimes a real lack of collaboration, and as I say, adversarial, which doesn't create a good environment to thinking about, well, what are we changing and how are we dealing with some of those bigger pressures and dealing with the rubbish bins and all those things that really make life enjoyable and really contribute to your well-being. And when I was in Adelaide, I found out that public meetings, hopefully not like this one, like a spectator sport. And when I stood up as the New Zealander talking about some stuff, it was like, right, everyone gets points for having a crack at the person and heckling and bringing them down. And I saw this headline while I was over there, and I was thinking, the the nature of the rhetoric and how the community didn't collaborate and didn't work together probably contributed to some of this for Adelaide. It's when I moved over there, someone said, oh, it's not between Melbourne and Perth somewhere, you know, it's in there, and they have a real issue and have had a real issue of young people leaving. Like young people, you know, don't see a future for themselves, aren't attached to the place. It's a beautiful place, great weather, got an amazing city, but they're like, well, there's nothing here for me, so they move on. And this part of this time where I moved over there was a time where the council and the community and a lot of non-for-profits and the private sector were, how are we going to change that? What on earth are we going to do to change this perception and change that nature of relationship that we have? And we're also, I've heard that I think, Philip, you just mentioned it before, that changing nature of retail, that dynamic on our main streets, which I'm sure you're feeling here. This was from one of the main streets in Adelaide, but that change in retail, the vacancies, all these things that, these economic sort of conditions that are shaping the places that we knew into something, and are we able to help reshape them into something else? And we've got these big conditions around us, and I think it's really hard sometimes to grapple with where's it all going and what's it doing. And then we have spaces like this. This is a festival plaza in Adelaide, which was designed by, I'm sure, like a well-meaning architect and urban designer and artist, and said, like, we've got this amazing heritage building in the Parliament. We're going to build this amazing festival plaza for the people. And the whole time I was in Adelaide, a few years, I never saw anyone use it apart from the skateboarders. So it's now been ripped up, spent 20-odd million redoing it. And I think it was that, let's put something in hope. Let's do something we know best as a local authority and as a government, state government. Let's put something down and really hope for the best. That's going to change the dynamic of this place. And one of the conditions in this, I mean, I still couldn't believe it, like it gets to 40 degrees in Adelaide and there's no shade. So this thing is like a heater, you know, it'll heat up and then for days it's warm, you know. So no thought about trees, shade, heat, all of those human conditions and elements that really make life amazing and enjoyable. And then this is an image, quite an old image from Sydney, but the conditions that we've started to shape for people, and obviously you need a crew of you to cross the road in some places. And this was taken by Fred Kent, who's well known in the Social Life Project, but really looking at how on earth do we get to this place that, you know, you need a whole group of you to cross a street in a city, as opposed to the streets and the spaces being designed for life and for people to really enjoy it, where they'll then come back again and again. You probably won't want to come back if it's like this. So really, it's about, so and in terms of placemaking, so I want to get into this placemaking and what on earth is it? And there's a few different, you know, if you search the web, there's a few different sort of definitions, I suppose. But I like this one where it's embracing the ideas, energy and capital of local people and working with them to create a collection of places with distinct style and character. So this place, it's very, very different to Gisborne, it's very different to Christchurch and Auckland, and it's thinking about you're very different to those people, you all have things in common, but what is it about your ideas and energy and capital, and how do we start to build that collaboration across? And when we think about a place, we think about all the people that use it. So this is sort of a simple diagram of, it's not just the council and the council staff or the elected members who use a particular space. It's not just the businesses. It's not just the homeowner. There's a whole bunch of people involved in it. And then there's certain conditions. There's different elements of capital, I suppose, environmental, social, cultural, economic and physical that contribute to it. A lot of the times we think about the physical. So we'll look at the street and quite rightly it could look like it looks horrible, looks terrible. Let's do something to fix it. But it could be the social, the cultural dynamics or the economic, environmental that is actually part of the place that may be letting it down or could be needed to. So how do you bring all of this together effectively? This is what placemaking is looking at. How do you think about the users, think about the people who own it, think about the people who could own it or could be involved in it, and really rethinking those relationships. And then as a group, where we come from our different positions, so whether it's your business or your home, or you come from the council, you go up the maintenance, that we're actually thinking about the place. And I think that's what the team here is trying to do, think about the town, the main street, thinking about what is it in this place? How do we come together to change this dynamic of it's just the council's job or it's just business's job? It's actually we're thinking about this collectively and all the value we want to add to it. And in placemaking I've talked a little bit about the government leading and government doing stuff, and I've been in local government and I'm really passionate about it, but it's how does local government and government at large start to build the capacity of citizens. And a lot of the work we do here from a government perspective might be project-led, we'd call it, where you do a project, you announce and defend it, you take a lot of complaints and hits, and sometimes it will work, but it hasn't necessarily thought about some of those place conditions, those other things, and the citizens, the people that you're involved, that you're leading effectively or working with, haven't been engaged in it. We're sort of looking to, it's not saying government disappears completely, but looking to how do we grow that community capacity where the government is facilitating and really supporting the people to have amazing lives and be involved in the creation of places, which I think traditionally in the past, that's what happened. People mucked in, got involved, and feeling now that like they're not, and you turn up to a public meeting and that's all your chance to get involved in things. And I just I use this story, this is after the earthquakes in Christchurch, and the central government, we've been working with some local artist groups on the recovery of the arts in Christchurch, and the government came in and they said, well, we're going to hire someone to come from Australia and talk about re-enlivening the arts, reinvesting in the arts. And so we gathered 40 of the arts leaders, I suppose, in Christchurch at the Polytech at the time, in a lecture theatre, and he said, look, I'll put all your ideas up on a board. This is, all the ideas you're working on. And then so people got up and they thought, this is great. And then he just went and rubbed them all off. And he said, look, what you guys need in Christchurch is a statue, not unlike the Angel of the North in Newcastle in the UK, standing over the city, telling people that it's rebuilt. If you've got all your money, spend it on that. And so everyone left the room just completely disheartened. These ideas, I look at them now, the Serco Arts, the River of Arts, have all disappeared. Everyone just left, all their ideas disappeared with them. And that capacity and the ideas and the energy they had for the city disappeared with it as well. And that was that. How do we start to collaborate on some of these? Some of these things might never have flown, but an Angel of the North certainly wasn't going to fix Christchurch, and it wasn't. It might be nice for Newcastle, but it's not of the place here. So I think it's really rethinking those relationships. And where do we start? I suppose when I first arrived in Adelaide, we were working in between where they were redeveloping the Adelaide Oval and the Adelaide Central Market. There's a whole bunch of laneways, series of streets. Anyone said it's dead. There's no one there. No one's connected to it. Nothing happens. It's a horrible spot. So when we went in and I started working there, I realised there's a whole bunch of people that were really attached to the place and really connected to what went on there, whether they had a business that opened up to it, or they went down it to get somewhere, or they emptied the bins. There was a whole bunch of people that were really invested in that space. And it was starting to build the relationships with them as a foundation for where we went next. That was crucial to getting some of the results that I'll start to talk about. And then starting to understand through these people, their experiences in the place. So as a council staff member, I might have my own way of viewing it and think like this looks a bit narrow or what have you, but actually seeing how people use it. So we went around with people. People took their photos and videos, and this is pram cam. So what's it like? Rosie will experience this shortly. What's it like walking around Timaru with your pram? Where do you have to stop? Narrow streets. Really not a. And as we found out of this, as I'll talk about, not a great environment and somewhere that people didn't really want to be. And then as those relationships started to form, we started to understand some of the stories of people. And this chap here, I took this photo the last day I was in Adelaide after 2.5 years or thereabouts, on a main street in Adelaide where we'd been working, and he's watering the plant, a box with water, which is very valuable. You pay a lot for water in South Australia. And it's interesting because he turned up to a public workshop within a pub. So the council at the time said, look, we're allowed to run workshops in pubs. That's the place where people meet, so let's do it there. And so there was a workshop being run in the pub, part facilitated by a community member and a member of staff. I was there. And this guy turned up and he had seen the little poster on the window, and he's banned from council offices. He's not allowed anything to do with council. He gets physically violent, abusive, but he'd seen the poster on the window and thought, oh, right, I can turn up because there'll be no security there. I can have a crack. There'll be some staff, and so he turned up, and he got told to sit down. So someone he stood at the back, and I was like, oh my goodness, he's turned up. But he got asked to sit down by one of the community members at the table, his working tables. And at the end of the workshop, he went home and got his tools because he realised that it was everyone mucking in to start fixing some of the fences and things. And the story he had was actually, he had this vision for this main street to be this green street. He wanted to be this green street. So over many years, he'd had some fights with council about asking for planter boxes, getting street trees cleaned up and maintained, and got more and more aggressive, from what I understand, over the years, to a point where he wasn't allowed back at council. And so one of the chaps from council was there and said, well, I've got some planter boxes at the depot, let's put them out if you look after them, which he now does. So the street's actually, as you can see, already pretty green. I was there, it's a pretty amazing street. But these planter boxes are put out for Alan, and it was unpacking that story that he had about how he got to the point where it was so adversarial, sort of banned, to the point where you're able to move on and have that relationship about how we make things different. And so as we understand, as we develop those relationships, it's critical to understand what's going on. I think, again, we don't do that very well. This is some work that the businesses did with us in Adelaide, looking at why people are visiting the area. So that's that narrow street with Pram Cam. It's between two amazing destinations, but it was sort of a ghost town in between. And they're finding 67% of people just pass through. And when they're talking to them about why that is, it's the conditions of the street. There's nothing to eat, there's nothing to see, there's nothing to do, it's not very comfortable, might be hot. And then we started to plot on, or the businesses started to plot on when they closed and opened, and we laid on some crime statistics. So this is the businesses here closing sort of around 4 o'clock in the afternoon in the yellow, the ones that are open in the blue. And then some that are open on the weekends, and it really drops off on the weekends. But you look at the crime statistics with antisocial behaviour and police call-outs, it was here. So it started to layer on when things become pretty dead, pretty inactive, what type of uses, and then talking to the business about how they really contribute to that and that life in the street and actually creating something special. So we then started to work, and I think what you're doing here, from what I understand, looking at some of the material and things, starting to think, right, we've got to change some conditions pretty quickly. We want to do something quickly. So this was one of the laneways, the arcades. So it was empty, had 7 shops empty, had the council tried to put up the archives, that put up old photos, but it was very quickly, and there's a laneway out the side of that, out the back of that, where, you know, the owner of the building next to you come on Mondays and clean up the needles and the vomit, and it was pretty horrible. So really, how do we change those things really quickly with those owners of these buildings to start to deal with stuff and bring people back? So in that mall, we just facilitated with the owner, bringing in some businesses on very cheap rent. So there's 7 vacancies, 7 got filled up. The owner's like, right, we'll build those up over time, and after 6 months, they're all full commercial rent-paying businesses. And together they created this destination. So there's a cafe, there's a chocolate shop, there's a little bagelry here, Vietnamese bread roll shop. So it was lowering the barrier to entry to these people who wanted to start a business who couldn't take on a 1 to 5 year lease at a particular square metre rate. They had an idea for a business, and the owner, it was brokered to give them a short-term leg up to get in, which then has created a destination. And then fill up the laneway with the events and activity, and that really gave that owner confidence to really rethink about his tenants. He had a bank on the corner and a couple of empty spots. He then split those up to talk about, or to really open up into hospitality and some other types of businesses, as opposed to blank frontages with an ATM, into something quite different. So immediately you're changing conditions. And this is the bagel shop. They've now got, I think, 3 bagelries across the country. So they started out on across Adelaide, they started out on a little cheap rent deal, and they had queues immediately. You know, they'd worked out how to do it, and away they went. And then some of those dodgy laneways, the unsafe parts, it was rethinking and embracing those artists that are in the community. So saying, well, we've got this dodgy laneway, no one wants to go down, it's pretty unsafe. And an artist are like, well, I'll make it a feature, or put pool noodles, you know, sticking out the wall, and then, you know, people are all over it, becomes a destination. So really rethinking that experience in place and rethinking how people use it and interact with it was crucial and those ideas that were in the community that we could start to bring out to deal with some of those underlying problems. and challenges that we had uncovered. And then we started a whole bunch of series of interventions. I think like you're doing here to really try some things. Some didn't work, some did. It was really enabled by those ideas out of the community, whether it's street parties, festivals, close the street. This one where, you know, there's a massive debate. I didn't put the slides in about Adelaide and car parking. It happens everywhere, I'm sure, here about, you know, car parking and cars. And one of the businesses is like, well, let's put a tree. Like they couldn't work out whether they want a tree in the car parking space or a car, you know, what's better. And so they could ask people who came to the shop, you know, what do they like best? So they put the tree and the VW out the front and could start that conversation. What's adding more value to the street? What adds more life, and why would you come back to it? And then you know, allowing people to sort of start taking over space and rethink it. And then so out of this, we started building this web of relationships in Adelaide, and it's happened in other projects I've worked on. You start the projects, those little things which people think, there's nothing to them, they trials, or they look a bit tacky or temporary. They're actually starting to build those relationships of doers, of people who are actually into doing some things and changing the nature. So instead of just, right, we're doing a project, we're going to put it in and hope for where it went, sort of that linear process. This is right here. And this, so Sarah was facilitating this from the council, but then Dimitri's one of the biggest landowners in the city, who he said when we started, I normally work with council in court. That's how I win every time, and I take them to court. After this, he was painting buildings and paying for artwork, and he had really got engaged in this, and then had this whole other network of people that opened up, and particularly in the property council, it was amazing to start to think about those relationships and how we started to work with others. And then out of that, you're sort of starting to work on a place vision. So as I said, that earlier thing, those capitals, we in this case were finding, look, it might not be the physical stuff that needs to change too much. It might be the social and cultural or economic conditions. As I say, we filled up some of those vacant spaces, really started to change the social as a destination and meeting place, but also the economic condition, particularly for the landowners who were struggling to get a rent and a return, and some of those small interventions that built up over time. So really thinking about, right, what are you doing? And is it related? Is it going to actually solve the issues and take the opportunity that you've understood and that you can see? And then as we did that, we started working. This is back to the main street where the chat was earlier. You're growing that web of relationships, and people are starting to say, look, I can do some stuff. And this was a street where, you know, this little space looks really nice, like the 2 seats and a planter box. Well, it looks okay. The business was saying no one ever uses it. There's no one ever here. You've got these street furniture that was put out in the theme, and then a community had been calling the local business community for a massive master plan, redevelop sort of $7-8 million to redevelop the whole street, add more trees and things. And one of the businesses came with the idea and realised that their friends said, well, if you sit here and there, you can't actually talk to each other. So it was just a matter of moving the benches, and then the businesses just painted some stuff on, and then they started the conversation. Let's turn this into a games room, an outdoor game space. Let's move the benches closer so people can actually converse with each other. Let's put some things out, replant it, put the herbs in for these 3 businesses that can start to own that space based on the relationships and the dynamic that they're starting to hear on the street, and that they have their own little thing, their own little space that they start to own and inhabit. And then as you do that, understand those relationships, this is a place called Kadina in South Australia, a little town of 5,000 people. You start to uncover some things that you had thought there was a solution to, but it's quite different. And this was in this town. There's, you know, the community. There's a massive parking problem. You cannot find a car park for love nor money. And in the main street, it was pretty difficult. You know, people would drive up and down trying to find a car park in here. There was a simple car parking survey. I think there was 300 car parks within a 5-minute walking distance of the main street. And actually, it was the conditions down the streets and the experience of it where people are like, I don't like walking down there. It feels unsafe. It's not very nice. There's nothing to see. So I'm always trying to park on the street right outside the shop. This is a town of 5,000 people. So immediately they started saying, well, let's change the nature. So this is the dynamic of that experience. So this is that same building, a street artist and the business owner, turn it into a big Instagram wall where you stand on the swing and you can stand in front of the peacock and look at your feathers. So starting to think about how we use those resources we've got, instead of trying to build a car parking building, which had been talked about in a town of 5,000 people. Actually, we've got all the space around us. It's the walk, it's the travel to those businesses, that destination that was terrible. How do we change that with something that isn't actually all that expensive and is much better looking than a car parking building, probably. And then this is a town in Pittsworth. So again, that really people. This is a town, another town about 5,500, just out from in the Darling Downs, out sort of in Queensland. And when I turned up there with actually a colleague, and they had terrible relationships amongst themselves, or not terrible amongst themselves, a little bit adversarial, and then with the council it was pretty terrible. And it was these guys saying, hey, we've been hearing all this stuff, we want to do some things, we've got these ugly spaces. Again, young people want to leave this town, they don't want to stick around once they leave high school, there's nothing for them, and this is near a bus stop. So we turned up at a workshop, and we started to sort of talk to them about what was possible. And they said, look, we've already got a plan, we just want to get on and do it. And we'd been employed by the council, myself and a colleague, and we said, the council person wasn't there at that point. I said, well, why don't you just do it? We've been told we can't, we've been told we're not able to do that. And we've got a plan to pave it and put up fairy lights and do an outdoor ping pong table and do all this sort of stuff. And my colleague I was with said, well, why don't you just do it? And you guys can pave, can't you? And one of the guys from the men's shed stood up, you Kiwis, you come here, tell us we can't pave. Of course we can pave. So 7 o'clock the next morning, these guys are paving the site. Like, they are out there. And it turned out it was the health and safety plan that had been holding 4 years worth of progress back. So this community, and a smaller community, and I'm assuming a place like Timaru, there's people with skills, resources and ability to really bring some of this. And this, someone had a digger, and someone knew how to pave, and someone had the string line, and they came down and they got into it. And so by the end of the day, they pretty much finished paving. They put up some fairy lights that really started to take ownership of the space. And we had just done the health and safety plan for them, which is the thing that was holding them back. And actually, that enablement of that built those relationships. Pittsworth, where are they going next? This is only scratching the surface of what's possible. We can do a lot more. And if they did a thing for young people, chalk drawing, what are they wanting once they get off the bus from high school, because they rural area, they come back here, or they get on there and disappear. What do you want to do when you're waiting for a bus? What is it about this town that you want to experience that's different from just having to get to school, get off, go home? You're really starting to think about what your social and cultural destination will be. And then I did want to put this one in, because this is some work I've been doing with up in Gisborne, so it's obviously a little bit topical for where they're at. But the Tairāwhiti Adventure Trust, who are like really inspirational group, community group, a group of one of New Zealand's best surfers. There's a BMX rider and an adventure racer, and family people, and they're like, there's nothing for young people in Gisborne. So they said, we want to build a pump track, and we want to build a skate park, and we want to build another little track for scooters. So they did. So they went and raised the money. So I was up there just at the end of last year, and this is hosting the Nationals. So they're hosting the National Skateboard Championship. So obviously for the town, that's a big deal. And they're trying to really turn on its head as a community. Gisborne is a place for young people. Again, it's isolated now, particularly, but it is an isolated part of the country. It's a beautiful part of the country. But again, how do they get young people attached and feel like it's part of their DNA to stay and be part of it? And then they've been running street events. They've closed the streets down outside this. So this is Grey Street. They've got the pump track and stuff over here. So their vision is to turn this into a whole young people's space. So there's an information centre here, which they are now working on taking over and turning into a climbing gym and a gymnasium and a training gym. And they talk about esports. They're finding all these things, that arts and cultural activities that young people across the district, not just skating or BMXing, and now they're talking about this taking over this whole part of the street. So and that's part of the work I'm with them. How do they start to engage both sides of the street? So this is a place that young people know what they can do. And they're doing this all themselves. And it's been amazing because the council's inspirational. The council has said, off you go. You guys managed to raise millions of dollars for a skate park. You know, we're the road controlling authority, but you can start to chat. So they've taken out some car parks. So these car parks have gone before Christmas. They've got drop-off areas. They've got a car park outside a skate park for an ambulance. So they've worked out that comes and goes a little bit. So they need a specific spot for that. But they've really, as a community, taken this over, and they're really trying to re-engage local people. And now it's the businesses, the main streets up here, the town centre. You know, how are they connecting this with scooter tracks, active transport, walking, cycling? Where's place for parents and grandparents? You know, people who are connected grandparents to this. How do they take over and start to think about these spaces for their next generations who are going to inhabit it beyond them? And then they've reduced the speed. So they said, we're going to put some signs up, reduce the speed. It's too fast, 50 k's an hour is too fast. So we want to do this all themselves. So it's been really inspirational. And then back to Adelaide, I think that thing of the barriers and finding out what it is that's holding people back. So this is a laundromat, and in a laundromat you do your laundry normally. And this was, again, a spot near the university in Adelaide, where young people were saying there's nothing to do here, and this is sort of university age people. And so the laundromat, the guy who owns the laundromat said, well, I could turn it into a venue, couldn't I? And you know, this is where the council, that negotiation, that partnership with the council really came in. The council guy was like, well, you can't, you need a toilet, and without a toilet, liquor licensing is quite hard. And then it was a business next door who said, well, they could use my toilet. I shut up shop, my toilet's got an external door, we could do that. And the council have facilitated, turned into a live music venue, which Thursday, Friday, Saturday nights, all these university students became a spot to hang out in a laundromat. So starting to repurpose the day activities with the night and rethinking these spaces. And then for the council, some work. I was at the council at the time. A lot of the stuff we were doing was listening, seeing those tactical trial projects, seeing what we could do and what was holding people back. And we had one of our policy analysts reviewed all the policies that related to public space, use of space in the streets, in the downtown and private space, and there was 544 that they found. In one council meeting, they got rid of about 230 of them. So busking in particular areas or outdoor dining that you couldn't do. And so really turning it on its head, that relationship between the public and the public sector and the community, the private, the businesses, the not-for-profits, the people who are trying to do these things. And then as we did some own soul searching, we worked out, well, a woman came to us and told us her experience of trying to get a planter box on the street outside her business. So we put together a little video of this, just what does it take to get a planter box? So she explained her experience of ringing the council. And none of those things are wrong. You know, the infrastructure, the public space, the design, all of them together. But the way we had been operating had meant that when someone with an idea, you know, they binned it straight away. It just became too hard. But how do we start to build that relationship with people with these ideas, these things that we're starting to hear about? How can we be that enablement and start to have that relationship like we're all in this place together, we want the best for it, what can we do about it? And this was the planter box. And then we worked out, like, these guys had an idea to close their little laneway street. There's a comic shop and a couple of hospo businesses, a little laneway. And they got told to do it. It's like thousands of dollars for a traffic management system, 2 trucks at the end, flashing lights, a person at each end. And then when we went through the rules, we found that it was in South Australia. I haven't gone through them here, but it was a planter box on wheels with 1 flashing light and road closed. That was actually all you required to close the street, so they could get trained themselves in it. So starting to rethink again that relationship of how it works. And then we started to get the ball rolling. So this is a dodgy little space in West End of Adelaide. Again, the street was pretty dead. It's called the Wild West. It looked like this, and then Monday again it had that antisocial, the needles, the vomit, all of that sort of stuff. No one wanted to look after it. And we heard from 3 young guys, and they said one's a chef, one was a landscape gardener, and one was a town planner. They said, look, we'll give it to us. We'll take over. The council didn't own it, but the power company owned it. It was just a little offshoot. They left it, and didn't care about it. So they said, well, we'll do something with it. We'll go and we'll think about some opportunities for it. So they turned it into Peter Rabbit Cafe. So you go and there's rabbits running around where you're having your coffee and you pat them and all of that sort of stuff. But it was their idea, which then stimulated the cafe is just here. And this is the street, the rest of the main street, which was fairly dead, some derelict buildings. And that stimulated these owners here rethinking their tenancies, starting to put some effort into their buildings and thinking about if people actually come, like that dodgy space that one day, we were calling the cops for the antisocial behaviour, the fights, all that sort of stuff that happened there. Overnight almost, it's changed. And there's people turning up, like the place became a destination. We can do something about this. So it stimulated that greater conversation about actually we need to have some action and do some things to change the conditions. And as those guys with their business, these people with the business, the owners, the council thinking about, right, we can contribute by, lowering the outdoor dining fees for a few months. So it's low barrier to entry to get people doing some stuff. The street artists came in, worked on the street as part of a wider street art project. And again, that Wild West tag sort of gets forgotten about pretty quickly when you've changed those conditions. And then those people that were involved in this is a workshop we ran about the next part of this was the permanent project on the street. So the council did have to redo the infrastructure in the street. It was aging. There was going to need to be it, but it was actually, let's get these people that have been doing these, business owners, these artists, to help us shape the brief. And then they've been working on that. And I think that's the next part of this, is that starting to get to that pathway to permanence beyond some of the temporary stuff, which is great. The activation, actually, what is it that we're going to invest in? And that actually, where can we get the funding beyond what we know of? And this is that narrow street with the pram cam. So this is what it looked like. The business has obviously said, after looking at the pram and how people experienced it, looking at their business and their turnover, saying we could probably do much better. And so they said, well, we'll give up car parking. After that 6 months of relationship building, there was a lot of work with them, understanding business conditions, talking to people outside. That thing of most people pass through, they don't stop, understanding a lot of that sort of stuff. And then they said, well, we'll give up car parking space temporarily, so that which they did. And so, there's more space to walk or put out outdoor dining. And then make it a little bit better, and then start to close the street, do some festivals, events, start to rethink it, so that as they get into now, the permanent, again, the street had infrastructure that was aging, needed to be redone. What is the street going to be? What is the value of it to these businesses, to the people who live above it, to the people who use it day to day, to the connections beyond it? And this is the vision, the joint vision they started coming up with. Actually, the car parking, there was car parking building not far away, but the car parking on the street was fine, but it was actually better to have a people experience and that human experience that was more valuable to the city. And then they've gone beyond that. So this is it here. Or is it here? So they've now started thinking about a much wider master plan as business is getting engaged in where those antisocial behaviour hotspots, where is those things we can change. Let's build this plan up, and it's almost ground up, starting to build from all those little experiments, and actually building that bigger picture of. And then for the council, helping the prioritisation of investment, which is really hard because you hear from everyone saying we need it here, or don't do that, or it should be here. Then you're right, we've got that energy there. Let's go with that and really build that, and then work with those others to grow that and expand this wider district. And I know I put this one in because I know Gapfilla's working here. But this is a little one from Christchurch. So after the earthquakes in Littleton, Gapfilla did this, and people are like, it's a vacant space. but the people of Littleton have been saying we want a space for people. We want a little town square. So Gapfiller facilitated this, tell people to spring their chairs. They put a baton court in, and that really gave the impetus for council then to buy the land. It's now Albion Square in Littleton. So if you go to Littleton on a Saturday where the market's going, it's got Albion Square there. Saturday's a great time to go up on to look at the port town. That impetus, that experiment, that trial went into actually growing community engagement of how the space could be used as, is it for kids, some of the sculptural aspects, really that experimentation, and then the council were able to come in and say, look, we can get behind this because we know what's going to happen and what the opportunity is in it. And I sort of just worked through the last sort of thing, and I think this is really important. This is my last few years working with Riverside Market in Christchurch. So this, if you know Christchurch, so Oxford Terrace here, the Bridge of Remembrance. So this is about 1975. So this is a point in time where this is a park, but it was going to be turned into a car park. So there's a lot of call for, we need car parking, more car parking in the city, and I'm not, against car parking, but it was an interesting dynamic hearing the story from someone way back, and they sent through this photo saying, you realise what you've done today is quite different to what it was going to be back in the day. So, Durham, Cambridge Street coming down, the old police station, the now council building, our post office, Oxford Terrace. So that's what it looked like. And obviously we then had an earthquake, and there was the Restart Mall, the buildings came down on this street here. The car park in 1975 didn't go ahead, so that the community rallied to save it as a green space, save it as a park. It's called Friendship Park or Friendship Corner by the Bridge of Remembrance. And then the earthquake happened, the buildings came down, and Restart Mall. So it was a sort of that tactical trial to get retail back happening in this area. And it was pretty low key, it was pretty colourful, it did attract a number of people, but it was that start of something. And then the council, alongside that, started thinking about what could Oxford Terrace. So this is Oxford Terrace here. There's car parks, streets, footpaths, and an artist came up with a concept of eels that would spread out from the river, because a lot of the public rhetoric and the public discussion had been always, let's embrace our natural assets. So in Christchurch, it was the Avon, can we use the river as a connecting feature through the city? So this was an opportunity alongside the restart to do something that started to change the dynamic of that space. And now today, so this is Oxford Terrace, and so I then worked on Riverside Market with the investors of that and the government and the council at the time to really rethink that space. So this is what Oxford Terrace looks like today. Obviously Riverside, which we were told was never going to work in Christchurch. No one will turn up. Big risk for those investors to do something like that. When I worked with Adelaide Central Market, I'd seen what markets and good destinations and food can do. But in Christchurch, I was saying, no, it's too small, it's never going to happen. But they went ahead, and it was really that place-led approach. And how do they partner with the public sector to get it going at the same time? So this became a really active building, turn the street over from what it is into a pretty amazing spot for people now. Hopefully you'll get a chance to go, or you've been and had a look. We're at is amazing. We did when I was there. We hosted the National Balance Bike Championships, for 2 and 3 year olds. We've hosted Filipino Christmases. So it started to be a place where we knew those communities were out there. The young kids, some of the migrant communities into the city wanted to express themselves and come together, and we could use that public-private space as critical parts to doing that. And we've hosted calligraphy classes, or we did calligraphy classes, still doing, Chinese New Year. We said this is a place, there's public spaces, and with the private, these are spaces you can start to take over and really celebrate what we are as a city. And particularly, it's really interesting going back now because it's thriving. Riverside is going really well. And to think about when we are a few years before that, hearing, it's not going to work, it won't work, and then trying to work with the council and the government at the time, also the Recovery Authority. Can we get that? What's that investment like in that promenade space? to get the public space. So I think now if you said to people, let's go back to that, it would be no way. And we know now, like I've been doing some work with ChristchurchNZ, the value of the value of the land, the value to the city, because this per square metre, these areas now, these pedestrian spaces, the shared spaces, obviously Cashel Mall up to the bridge, and there's Oxford Terrace now that runs along. The highest land values in the city, highest rates per square metre in the city, and some people don't want to pay rates, but for the city trying to pay for services, they need, you want these valuable assets to help you, support the rest of the city and the rest of, and what Christchurch is trying to achieve across the rest of its suburbs. And it was really important to really invest in that stuff to see that long-term return. And as I say, I think if we said, let's build a car parking building, let's go back to that, there'd be a bit of an uproar about it. I do want to just play, the sound wasn't working before. I've just got one last video and then we'll get to some questions. But I just want to, just push play, just do a hover over that and see if it, just push play, see if that.
I think it's about being able to take some ownership around the street, your neighbourhood. This is our neighbourhood in reality. For a city, the street, for a business like ours where we take up the whole block, the front street, the front entrance is actually our neighbourhood. And in the past, you feel very detached from what goes on outside your door. So the concept for me in placemaking is that all of a sudden, as an organisation, we can actually have a say in what happens. Personally, I have felt that you didn't have much say in what happened unless you occasionally went to a forum or you put together a submission. The concept now for me is actually when you do things like this, it does give us some ownership, and it's not just about what the council can do, it's what we can do as well and how we can do it in partnership, and that as businesses together, what we can do.
And I think this is Robin, so 2 and a bit years after we'd started working through this sort of place-led approach, we got asked to do an evaluation on it for the council because they've been investing in some people, to be these facilitators. So we had a videographer and interviewer go out and do these interviews with people in the streets, these business owners, about what the experience was. And this is Robin's interview, so it's amazing because all the interviews are really incredible. So playing it to the councils, they've now invested well beyond what the 2-year trial pilot process to embedding it within the council and the way of working within the community. But for us, hearing Robin talk about that partnership, the ownership she had of the space as a business, the interaction with the council, and that it wasn't that throwing rocks anymore. It was like, well, we're all on this globe together, I suppose, where I started. So we've all got to try and make it better somehow. We're not going to get anywhere by not collaborating. And as we know, there's some big, challenges ahead in terms of other things that'll go well beyond what we can deal with. But locally, what can we change and how we're going to work together? So it's sort of a whirlwind tour through sort of that place-led approach, some of the stories, and I'm keen to hear questions and feedback. I don't know if anyone online's got anything, but really for you at the moment, really hear where you're at, what's going on, and how as Timaru, you're thinking about where this place goes. So as I say, that Christchurch in the 70s, we've been never guessing what it is today, and we did have an earthquake in between. But thinking about, right, the next generation of people who are going to be here beyond you, what are they inheriting, and are they inheriting that action that we're doing stuff together and really sort of moving on. So thanks for having me. Hopefully that has been interesting and insightful, and I'm keen to hear questions and have a discussion if possible to see where you're thinking, where you're at.
Michael, that was really good. I just, obviously you stayed the night last night. You had stretched the time to walk around downtown. And I hope looking around this room, perhaps on the walls, that we hopefully are maybe addressing some of the things that we need to address. And certainly there's probably some wee gems that would stick out to you coming, and are we, such as the Royal Arcade and things like that. So do you see, what are the key prime things that you see, what you've seen today, that we perhaps didn't, are we missing anything?
Yeah. Like I look at this and I haven't absorbed all of it, but I think there's a lot of great stuff going on in terms of I suppose you've started, where are we going? We've got to do something, so that's the first platform, which is great. And then thinking about, right, you've got this amazing, pretty incredible urban fabric and, town centre, Main Street, and you've got a lot of people who are invested in it and really care about it. And you've got the gems like the arcade, which have just came through to sort of poke around thinking, right, you've got those bones of things. How are we then going to, I think, build that relationship and that push-pull with the business community and the community to say, look, we've got to change and we need to do some stuff together. And I think the street here, I like, just reflect my wife's experience when we come down this way. We come often, we normally go to Oamaru. She loves it down there, and it's that destination. But when we've come here, I say we've got to go through Timaru and have a look, because I'd come here a couple of years ago, walked the street, and she's like, man, the op shops, the shops, but no one knows about it. So there's absolutely, for me as a visitor, I think there's a whole area of exploration around how you're talking about yourselves, how you're marketing, and how you're putting together the experience of what it is in the city to start with, that soft stuff, which is sometimes neglected. It's like, well, right, we've got to, we'll do that later on once we've got stuff. But I think you've got a lot going on here. Fill it with the museum and then rebuild the Isaac Theatre. And I think up that end of town, there's a really amazing opportunity to think about that arts, cultural, that district that you're going to create, and hopefully through an event and festival start to explore, right, how are we going to have our arts community really feeling like they own town, and that this is a place, when I'm in Christchurch or someone's in Wellington, I've got to get down there to have a look, because they have got something I can't get elsewhere. And I think about that experience of these little towns I've been, they've grabbed something within the community, some of those ideas, and they've just run with them and gone with it to see how it goes. And I think maybe Sean Stockman owns Royal Arcade. There's some fabric and some owners there, probably, like Sean's done some good stuff, Christchurch, some great stuff. How do you really engage to get that use of some of those urban spaces quickly turn over, so it feels like it's people space. It feels very quickly like a space where locals come in, like Riverside, and then visitors sort of want to come to. So, as a bit of a roundaway, the answer, I look and think there's a lot of answers here, like a lot of the stuff you're doing in terms of understanding the space, trying to do some stuff quickly. I think it's really critical for within council. I know it's really hard, having been in council, being a leader in council or in staff, to keep that leadership going, because you're like, man, that we feel like we're up against it sometimes. We're doing some experiments, or we're changing something, and a lot of people typically don't like change. They want it to be, but we're saying there's a future state, or there's some things happening. And I know last time we had a discussion about earthquake-prone buildings and getting funding, and then finding tenants and retail and online. What does that mean in the future for this place? Are these things we can start to tackle by getting those businesses engaged and helping them see, where things might go? Because some of them are, will be in, I've just got to run this business day to day, as opposed to thinking way out, about the conditions that are going to come and sort of change the nature of business. So, yeah, I love it here. I come down, I might go to Jack's Point, and I'll go to Caroline Bay, and I'm like, man, and I am bringing my wider family from Wellington. We're all going to come down for a weekend. As I said, you can bring kids, you can go to the pools, you can go to the beach, there's op shops, there's shopping. But there's people don't know a lot about it, a lot about the place. And I think when they come, there's I probably feel sometimes you're like, you just, it's not as a destination. There's probably not a series of destinations and things that go. And in placemaking, a lot of time we talk about in a place or at Main Street having 10 things to do, so as well as shopping, the businesses, but what are the 10 things that you're going to do as an experience? So, and Christchurch, we've been doing that, in Riverside, and then adding a play space, going and feeding the eels, which is pretty easy, give them, get some meat from the butcher, adding those 10 things that add up to that whole experience that then your marketing people, your economic development agency can start to talk about that. And I think it's probably when I come, my wife and I might do shopping and my boys might go to Caroline Bay, and it's sometimes quite hard to get there, seemingly, but it's so to add those experiences, which people will do with some of these things, a games room on the street or a new museum or a refurbished museum will become a key destination. How do you link that to those other things that are going on? Particularly, got the amazing top end of the street and then down to Caroline Bay and then back to that district, and how you're really going to make this the main street of the country that people can't avoid, get off the highway.
Just a question, we've got a very long main street. Have you done your work in such long situations? Because a lot of the examples you gave were quite short streets. How do you handle something as long and skinny as that?
Well, I think, to be honest, a lot of them, like the Melbourne Street one, was longer than this, or as long or longer, but they've broken it up into pockets, and then that's that experience thing. They thought, right, it's hard to tackle that all at once.
But you've got a million people there, though, haven't you?
Well, yeah, around Melbourne Street, it's a suburb. It's a suburb of Adelaide. So yes, the city's bigger, but it's a suburb of Main Street. But it's a long one, which has got a lot of vacancies and stuff. But let's break it up into bits. The same with Pittsworth. Main Street's not dissimilar to this. It's probably a bit shorter, but again, they're breaking it up. That was on one corner, so they're right. We've got the sports ground down one end. Let's do something here. Let's do those intersections where things come together and work on those conditions and changing that. And then within it, they were talking to the businesses about what they could do along the way. So it was sort of breaking it up. So yes, this is long. Absolutely, there's a lot, but I would be thinking, how do you break it up into those bits? And one of the things I didn't talk about, but when I've worked in councils or I've been outside of council and you've had an idea, it's where you're matching energy with energy. So if there's the energetic in the museum, right, we want to do a festival, an event, let's enable that and test that and experiment with that and see how that goes. So you're matching that energy in that part of the street. You'll get some people say, why on earth are you doing it? That's no good. Or you'll get people saying, why aren't you doing that down my end of the street? You say, well, we can. Let's go down there and start to work in that. So you have to, I think, long answer, but break it up in this situation and think about those little places within it. Yeah.
Hi, Susie Rada here. Listened to you talk on Splash Adelaide before through Express People.
Oh, yeah, cool.
Yeah, so that was really, really cool. And I was just wondering if you could give a bit more insight to some of the changes they made in the political space regarding those bylaws and getting the team on board to make sure that we can make things happen.
Yeah. Well, it was interesting because I think so Splash Adelaide was part of this, was the part of, right, we've got that invisible Adelaide and we need to change the dynamic very quickly. We can't keep finding the $7 million project to roll out. We've got to do some stuff really quickly. So they started what was called Splash. They went for it, and alongside that, that's good. The leadership of council, so that's the executive, so the elected leadership of council, the councillors and the CEO started discussing, right, well, what are we going to do to make this stuff happen really quickly? And they then decided, right, for Splash to happen, we're going to do some trials and experiments and we're going to change things really quickly. The CEO said, I'll take all the complaints. So every complaint that is coming through the door, which most of the time had gone to the councillors, the CEO said, send it to me. I'll deal with all of those. And then the councillors in return said, well, we'll give you some more delegations to be able to do those things quickly. And the conditions on it were you can put something in, but it needed, if it was not going right, it needed to be able to come out within 24 hours. And out of I didn't bring the slide, but there was over 3 years, 400 projects, and I think 2 were reversed because actually that car, that VW, someone had put it in an accessible car parking space, which isn't the right place, it needed to be, but, so that complaint came in, right, let's deal with that straight away. The team's very connected. So you had an elected membership who had owned, right, we're going to do this, and they'd given some delegation to the CEO saying that it's, as a pilot. So we're doing it over it was first a year, then in 2 years, let's do that. and let's build that trust within the council, between the elected membership and the council staff, to say, look, we're going to, give them, but you've got some parameters to that. So it has to be able to come out, and that we then actually start a little working group with councillors. We had 4 who were more representative of the business community, or they had wards, that's sort of the, I don't know the wards here, but of that area, who then met. I would meet with every week or every 2 weeks, just as an informal, what are they hearing on the street, what's going on, so we could start to really build that relationship. So that was some of the dynamic, I think. And then it got into the policy stuff, right? We're seeing that people are saying they can't busk, or there's all this red tape or whatever. Let's work out cutting that, which again, there was that executive team and the councillors saying, look, we can move that, we can go to a meeting, and we're happy to deal with that. It really started to change the nature of council, I think. So, yeah, those things.
I was just thinking that trying to get local people to do some of the work, as you mentioned, the guy watering his own planter boxes and some pieces like that. Just trying to figure out, how far you can go with that, and how much does the council end up having to sort of fill in when they stop watering the planter boxes, and how does that sort of get managed? And
great question, and I think, and in that particular case, so that the council guy that said, look, we'll put the planter boxes out, but you will need to, if it starts getting tatty or whatever, we don't have that maintenance budget or the extension of the maintenance budget to keep looking after them. He was very passionate about it, but they also then, as a group, on the street next to it, said, so that other people got wind of it, and they wanted to plant their verges with lemon trees. So they actually grew a community group called the Lemon Tree Carers Network. So they planted lemon trees in their verges. They were watering themselves, looking after them, and then as a group started looking after some of those planter boxes and stuff. So they self-organised, like it was nothing that the council had designed to happen, but the value that was obviously bringing to the community was such that they said, well, we need to have some organisation of this, and they had apparently there was a ritual. I never went down to check, but some of the gentlemen would be out 6 o'clock in the morning, urinate on the trees. That was part of their tradition, and then every year now they have a lemon harvest. They have a harvest festival where they're baking and they get together as a street. So then none of that was, sort of designed or planned. In some cases, I've been in projects where they have had to be taken. It's been might be a 6-month flash in the pan, but it has been that conversation. Look, we really want that energy. Or I've been in places where they've morphed into something else. So that was the idea. That actually didn't quite work, but let's go to something that actually can work, and we've tested that. And beyond that, so it's that flexibility relationship saying, it can't be a council thing. We want to provide the materials and the ability to do it, but if we keep doing it, it's going to really stretch us. Or again, in some cases, the council had in Adelaide, the head of city cleaning at the depot, Peter. So he joined the placemaking team, and he said, look, we can actually. He knew all the contract arrangements. He knew where people watered, where they cut trees, all of that sort of stuff, and he actually worked out they could, in some cases, extend their runs beyond where they normally did it, and it wouldn't cost any more to council. So there was efficiencies in some of the ways they did it, having that person who knew intimately the depot staff and the contract staff and how it could work. So, but that was the joy that joined up, I suppose. Starts to work. Yeah.
I was interesting to see that you've got projects down to towns of 5,000, because that's what I was sort of thinking.
Yeah.
Somewhere like Adelaide, you've got a mass of people.
Yeah.
And Timaru at times, it can feel a bit like a ghost town at times, but that's possibly because we're not pulling the people in to the central city, and just trying to, as I said, trying to create those spaces where you do start pulling people in for the weekend for no real.
Absolutely, and I think Gisborne, I think it's Timaru is about 50,000 or thereabouts in the district.
About 28,000 in the town.
48 district.
48 district, yeah. So I think Gisborne's sort of 40,000 district. And so they've been, you know, they've been, you know, the people with the venture trust being told to say it's not big enough, no one's going to come, you know, no one's going to, you know, but they put in the things, you know, for them it was the youth, the skate park, the pump track, so it's a different environment, but they're putting in those Destinata climbing centre and the gymnasium, and all of a sudden that people will come from, you know, you're creating those things that people probably didn't know that they wanted, or that the kids did want and they would go for, but it changed the nature of it. And I think in all the places like that Pittsworth one with their town of 5,000, and there were some people at the workshop who said it would never work, we're too small, we won't do it. And it was the men's shed, you know, some of the retired guys from men's shed, no, I've got a grandkid, I want them to stay here, we're going to pave this thing, we're going to, you know, outdoor ping pong table, and they used it. The kids turned up, you know, and they're like, no, and it will never happen. And that was the thing of, you know, everyone lives on farms, you know, it's a massive big farming district, and everyone drives in almost to there. And it was funny because they did say, oh, we've got a parking crisis. One of the guys from mentioned, so we've got a parking crisis. I was standing on the street, and all the parks outside this little space, there was 6 outside the space, or 7, there were all their utes in it and all that, with the big bull bars and all that on it. I was, oh, you know, so there's no and there was parks everywhere, the whole street, there's 200 parks, all the whole street, you know, and because they drive, but they can't, you know, they can't, they get, so he got in his car to go to get the pies for everyone, and he drove about 100 metres down. So we had a discussion about the parking crisis, because he said, I can't park outside the pie shop, that's the parking, you know. So then we started having this conversation, because and there, it was really interesting, their older population, so there's a woman who does a lot of planting and landscaping. She has a big nursery garden centre, does roses, and she plants them in the street and does all that sort of stuff. But they started talking about some of the crisis of heart problems, and, you know, a lot of these people weren't walking to places that was very inactive, and they were, you know, trying to say, you know, we're a remote place for our grandkids, and she was saying, well, let's make it a place where we walk down, but, you know, you drive, you know. So it was an interesting dynamic, I think. And some of the small places, you do it, it happens, and you can do it. And then Kadina was the same. It was classic. You know, it's like, someone's do it. Let's just change it, make those laneways better, put up some street art, and all of a sudden it's a different place, you know. And there's no problems. Well, there's not as many problems. So, well, yeah.
I mean, a question we've probably spoken about before, Mike, but it's lovely hearing about sort of working with where the energy is, and working with the willing and being led by that. But I'm sure we're not the only council that's also got, you know, been tasked with sort of having the long-term vision and being involved and thinking, you know, spatially about the town and what its assets are and how it could evolve over that kind of time frame, and working with wider group of stakeholders that can throw up community aspirations for particular areas, which can be at odds with the aspirations of stakeholders or businesses and what they're currently doing in those areas. So when you have those situations where perhaps the community aspiration to protect or convert or do something different with a place is not a natural match for those operating in it, you know, right now. Is there something you've got experience of, and if you've got any tips, tricks, silver bullets?
Yeah, well, I think, I mean, it's a good question. I think that Melbourne Street one where the chat was watering, that was really interesting, because it was a neighbourhood, so residential around it, with quite a long main street through it, and the businesses did have quite different ideas to what they needed to what the residents thought that they would come. So some of that workshop we ran in the pub was some of that, trying to bring them together to understand, because the residents were the ones who shopped in the businesses and would come to something, and the businesses wanted them to come, but the businesses didn't want some of the seating area, you know, rethinking seating areas, because and for them, you know, it did come down to, we don't want to lose car parking, because it was talking about make it greener. You know, as Alan said, he was a resident just off the street. We want to make it greener, nicer places to sit, to hang out, better green up the park a little bit, tidy it up. There's a business like, no, I don't want to, you know, I can't lose the car parking, or, you know, I feel, you know, that's a threat to the business, you know, fair enough, that they feel that will, other people won't come in. But so, and that was that, we're going to have to there's a bit of facilitation, that workshop style, like bringing some people together, and then some of those ideas, like that little one with the streets, the furniture, that came out of that conversation with business. Let's try something. Let's do some of these experiments and let's pilot it. Whether it's a few months to say, hey, look, there's some ideas out of the community that they're saying will bring more people into the space, that will change the nature of it. Let's have a look at that and do it for a period of time and monitor it. Like let's actively, as a business, and some of the businesses there would give turnover data, and those are the ones that I can see on a Saturday now, I have many more people come to the cafe from the local area because it's a nicer spot. But then maybe on a Thursday night, I don't, because I don't, that people aren't sure how to, so it was a really active monitoring thing. So it was actually trying to work out, can we try some of those things? Because you don't want to diminish the community energy, but then acknowledge what the business are trying to achieve, and can you get some experiments and pilots going to then trial and really monitor it alongside each other, and that's where we'd have a residents association head, the head of the residents association, which we had there. They had one that was pretty strong. Right, you'll be part of that monitoring, because you've got to understand the business need here and the desire of what that business is trying to achieve as well. So you can take it back to your part of the community.
So kind of related to some of the conversation linking into how have you seen other areas remain steadfast and brave and bold when it comes to the media and the media cycle?
Yeah, a really good question, because I think probably the hardest thing, a lot of the hardest thing out of this is being brave in that leadership. I think through it, and that the Adelaide one was the CEO and the councillor saying, we'll take that, we're happy to take the heat. We know that if we stay invisible, we're not gonna be any good. And it's the same with the Melbourne Street example, the little street, the pits with those leaders saying, actually, we know we're going to get heat. We know, but we have got a story, and we have got what we're trying to achieve out there, and we're going to keep pushing that out. And we know that the media, there's journalists here, there can be that, there's a good story here, let's put a headline across it that grabs some attention, that makes the council look really silly or look stupid to generate, a few more newspaper sales or clicks on the website. But it was probably the leadership of council, and I think that's elected members in the executive, where we're all getting together and saying, we know what we're getting into here. So in this sort of environment where you're saying, we're leading that big vision of what the town could be, and there's change coming, and change is difficult, and we've got the series, like you're doing here, the series of pilots, or there's some bigger policy changes that you're attempting. We know that there's going to be media in this, but we've worked out our strategy before, so we're not reacting at the time to, oh my goodness, that's started happening. And those spokespeople for the council, and whether it's the local councillors or the mayor or the exec, or they do it together, they have that constant, this is why we're doing it. And then I think also where it's probably worked well as a sort of side where some of the voices from the community have started to talk for it. I know that Melbourne Street one, some of the people in the cafe started, the council didn't have to be the media spokesperson, because someone would say, oh, this is terrible, and then the cafe is like, this is amazing, business has gone up, I've got more people from outside visiting the business, of course we do it. And then some of those cases, the story sort of disappeared after two articles in the paper. It was no longer anything that they, so, and I think another little strategy is, I don't, I'm sure the local journalists or who they are and how that, we would often have, the giving them the proactive stories, giving them the stuff, as much as we possibly could. I was in council, there is the sign-offs and things, but having them out, having them as part of the project, understanding what's going on. So again, it was, you've already known about this, and we've been, so there's a relationship built with that, with them as well. So it's probably a number of those things where it's worked well. And as I say, in all of these cases, probably there's always, like with that Pittsworth one where they did the paving. It was awesome because the guy from the media came out. He's like, he wanted to write a story about it, and he was asking where I was from and who, Med shared, and he was interviewing him. And he said it's really hard to write something when the guys buying my paper are saying this is a really good way to work, really good way to work. I didn't have to say it, the council person didn't say it was them. But then he said, because he was thinking of it, paving this and young people's space, it could lead to antisocial behaviour. There's this fear of antisocial behaviour. So actually it's refreshing because town's known for agriculture and rugby league. So it's like, that's all I write about. So it's actually quite nice. So him being part of the project, invited down for those days with their building stuff to see, to be able to talk to the community, change the dynamic a wee bit of what he was going to potentially view it. So. Final remarks. Thanks, Mike. No.
Just give some closing remarks. Yes. We're still recording, Troy? Yeah. So I just wanted to say thanks very much, Mike, for your presentation. We've really enjoyed that. And just wanted to say, if anyone goes away and thinks of a question, please email them in to citytown@timdc.govt.nz. And also for those online and those in the room, if you enjoyed that, or there's someone not here that you think should be here or could enjoy that, Mike's going to be presenting again at 6 o'clock tonight. And if neither of those times work for you, we'll put a recording and some slides up on the website in the next few days. So there's lots of opportunities. And while you're on the website, why don't you have a look at what we're trying to do here in Timaru? There's a lot of information up there, both in terms of the big picture and all the people who've helped to set that direction, and also the live trials. And we'd love you to have a look and give your feedback and tell us how you would apply Mike's insights locally. And even better than that, we'd love you to come and be part of the solution. So Mike is fully booked tomorrow with his sessions with community groups. But we could always set something up online if you know or you're associated with a community group and that would like to have a one-on-one chat with Mike about a project or an idea that you have in mind. And just a big shout out. It's difficult to find times that work for everyone, but just to acknowledge all the groups. We talk about what we're trying to lead from the council, but there's loads of groups here in Timaru, whether it's the Farmers Market, Woohoo, C-Play, CBD group. There are so many groups that are giving this a go and are trying that. So thank you. And I was thinking of some of the artists from Ignite that have supported the recent arts and culture trial, the first Fridays, and what they've really done in terms of owning that. I thought your graph in terms of a bit of council impetus and then community ownership really made me think of them. So please keep in touch. Do go online, send the invitation, and we look forward to hearing from you and all your feedback. Kia ora.
Thank you.